our instruction is going to be about two very important mind states. One of them this morning and the other one this afternoon. These two mind states that we're going to discuss, we all experience, but most of us are completely oblivious to the fact that we experience them. They're crucially important in the Buddhist psychology because they represent points of real freedom for us. There is a way in which we could say that all the other practice that we've done up to the point of today's instruction is groundwork for today's instruction. Oh, all the other parts of the practice are very, very important, and we need to watch all of the things that we've been learning to watch in our practice. But when we get right down to the very heart of the question of freedom from our conditioning, freedom from all of the things in us that run us about and move us about, from being in that condition that St. Paul talked about when he says, the good that I would do, I just don't do, and the evil that I don't want to do, I find myself doing. The ways in which we're unfree. Today's instruction is about the heart of getting to the points of freedom. There are two of these. I'm going to talk about one now and one this afternoon. I'm going to give you a brief overview of an itch on the cheek to talk about these. In any experience that we have, there's first some experience of which we become aware. Two things usually go on simultaneously with that experience. One of them, a mind state that's called perception. This is not what we're going to talk about. One of them, perception, identifies or tags the experience in some way. And when we note our experience, it's that mind state of perception at work. So you're already working with that mind state. It's automatic. Another automatic mind state that's associated with the experience is something that we call feeling tone, and I'm going to talk about that this afternoon. But when we get sensitive to feeling tone, we can often prevent ourselves from spilling over into a next step, which is usually some kind of mind state reaction to the experience. I don't like it. I like it. I want it to go away. I'm in aversion. I'm in greed. Or I want to tune it out. Or I'm not seeing it clearly and I'm in delusion. The feeling tone sets us up for mind states. And we're going to talk about that part of it this afternoon. Given that I'm already in a mind state, the next thing that follows a mind state usually is some impulse to act on that mind state. If I'm into aversion to this itch on my cheek, there's going to be an impulse to scratch it, an impulse to go off into complaining in my mind about it. I mean, various kinds of impulses will arise in connection with that based on my aversion to it. Most often, we never see the impulses that precede behavior that we engage in. We're in the middle of doing before we even know or realize that we're doing. Very often, we scratch our cheek without even being aware that we ever did the action itself, much less be aware of the impulse to do it that came before we do it. I have seen smokers, I don't know if you have, but I've seen smokers snuff out a cigarette butt and say, oh, damn, I just smoked another one. Went through that whole business asleep to what they were doing. One of the key things that the Buddha says to us is we are not awake for most of our lives. We are absolutely asleep to most of what we experience and do. You maybe learned this if you did as I suggested the other day and watched the inside of your mouth when you're chewing. I'll bet you became aware of so much happening that you have done for so long in your life and never before seen. We are asleep for most of our experience and action. So this mind state that's called intention, or the impulse to action, that often gets by us, precedes absolutely everything that we do. If we can start to see that impulse to action before we engage in an action, we're in a place to carve out a lot more freedom for ourselves. Because when the impulse arises, it has to reach a certain pitch or intensity before it automatically spills over into behavior. If we can start catching the arising of the impulse, we have the capacity to negate it and to just watch it die. Don't have to act on every impulse that comes along. We can see the intention to act arise. We can see the intention to act fall away. An important part of work with Vipassana is to watch these intentions. When we're actually doing our sitting meditation, before every movement that we would make, before every single movement, even small ones like changing the tilt on our head a little bit, there's going to be an impulse to action. There's going to be an intention to engage in that act. Difficult to see sometimes easy to see. We work with intention in a number of places. Actually, we work with it in all three main parts of the retreat: the formal sitting practice, the formal walking practice, and all the in-between times. How you work with it in your sitting practice is to try to be alert, to sit very mindful with the intention to try to sit still. And if a contrary intention arises, to try to be able to catch it. And when we see the arising of an intention to movement coming, to note intending. Sometimes, if aversion is very, very strong, we might not want to negate that impulse to move, and we might go ahead and scratch the cheek or shift the burning knee or do something like that. Sometimes just seeing the impulse to act coming, noting it, we can realize this comes, this will go. I don't have to act on it for it to go away. The impulse may return. If we just watch it, it will go. Sitting and watching impulses come and go teaches us some valuable lessons in a very deep way that we can't get any other way. We actually have experienced something that most people in our culture don't believe. We've experienced that an urge or an impulse or a desire to do something can come, and it will eventually go away, whether we act on it or not. This holds for virtually any impulse or urge or desire that we can have. It holds for any that we can have. Eventually, the impulse will go away. Our culture seems to have the idea that once a strong desire or impulse has arisen, the only way to get rid of it is to act on it, to satisfy the desire or the urge or the impulse, and then that's how I get rid of it. And of course, that's not how we get rid of it. The more we gratify it, the more we bend our minds in the direction of wanting more of that gratification when the urge comes again. And we're just locking ourselves more and more into a pattern of being pushed by that particular urge whenever it comes to want to gratify it. If, on the other hand, we have the experience of watching an urge come, seeing that it will go away all by itself if we don't act on it, we can start bending ourselves in a direction where it becomes easier and easier to say no to ourselves when the impulse is to an action that's not helpful, that creates disharmony or makes suffering for ourselves or other people. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's a fruit of practice, of watching this happen. The more we watch it happen in practice, the easier it translates over to our lives. Takes time, takes practice. I mean, that's why it's called practice. But that's a very, very real fruit that the practice can give us. Now, how we work with this in our walking meditation can be at several levels, depending upon what your own inclination is. I would suggest that you incorporate it at least 2 places into your walking practice. When you've come to the end of one length of walking, before you turn, watch the impulse or the intention to turn arise. Note the intending and then let yourself go into the turning movement. That's a very, very clear place we can see it, because it's very easy for us to see when we stand there at the end of the length of our walk, that without that intention, our impulse to start the turning, I just stand there. It's very easy to see. When the intention to turn comes up, if you want to play with it, you can negate that intention and watch it die. But of course you are going to want to continue your walking practice, so when the intention to turn comes up, you can watch that intention as you note it and see how when it reaches a certain level of intensity, the turning is virtually automatic. It's the intention that actually starts, when it reaches a certain intensity, starts the turning movement. Once you've completely turned around, another thing let's say this is optional now. We don't want to overload people. Many people will then start with the intention to start walking the length again. You can stand there after you've turned. Watch the intention to start your walking the length again, and then do it. And watch the intention arise. See how it starts the walking. Some people note the intention before every step they take in the slow walking. Oh, this I would do only in the slow walking part. The other, you're walking in a way that there's a more fluid motion without the stopping between steps that we have in the slow walking. So you can play with watching the intention for every single step and see how you stand there until that intention arises and reaches a certain intensity, which then, if you watch very carefully, you can see that the intention, the power of the intention itself starts the lifting movement. You actually can see that if you're watching very closely. There are times in the practice, I think I'll tell you this, I hope none of you try to make it happen, because trying to make it happen, it won't happen. So it's a function of mindfulness and attentiveness to intention. There are times when the walking becomes automatic. You're only aware of intention in your mind, and your legs just move themselves. The experience is, all I'm aware of is intention, and my legs start moving themselves. It's a very, very interesting experience when it happens in the walking meditation. So we work with intention in our walking meditation as well as in our sitting meditation. Find a few places in the in-between time when you're going to work with intention. Maybe every time you reach out for your doorknob, stand there to watch the intention to start lifting your arm before you do it. Maybe when you're walking around the building, every time you're going to turn, stop. Wait to see the intention to turn come, then turn, noting the turning too, of course, and resuming your walking. I leave it up to you to find a few places in the course of the in-between activities where you're going to wait to see the intention arising before you do an action. This is a very, very powerful, potent part of this practice, and this is, as I say, one of the points of real freedom in the practice. This will make you slow down a lot. That's wonderful, because the slower you move, the more closely you can be aware of what it is that you're experiencing at any point. You don't have anywhere to go. I mean, it doesn't matter how slow you go. The only task is to be with what I'm experiencing in the present moment. So you can go as slow as you need to go in order to be with that task. And this afternoon we'll talk about the mind state that's associated with that other point of freedom, the one that precedes the problem mind states that can arise. Okay, we'll sit now. As you establish your posture, check to see that your shoulders are over your hip bones, that they're loose and relaxed, not scrunched up tight around your neck, that your head is not hanging forward or thrust forward. Draw your attention to the area where you watch the sensations of the breath, bringing your attention inside the sensations and adding your note of in and out or rising and falling. If a sensation of any kind draws your awareness away from the breath, let your awareness rest in that sensation, noting it as you've been taught, watching it up to a minute or two, repeating the note every 5 to 10 seconds. If a mind state draws your awareness, let your awareness rest in that mind state with an openness to seeing what's happening in your body at the same time. And you can go back and forth between noting the experience of the mind state itself with your awareness resting in that experience and noting body sensations associated with it that also draw your attention. And after a couple of minutes, remember to take your breather back to the breath. If you should become aware of thinking of any kind, as soon as you become aware that you're thinking, note thinking, see the thought die, come back to the breath, and begin again. Sit with the intention to be aware of any intention to movement. And if an impulse to move should arise, note the intending and watch that impulse. If you should choose to move during the sitting, be careful to note the movements themselves, feeling the sensations associated with the movement. Be very aware. After you've attended to the bell, watch for the intention to open your eyes before you open them. You can note the opening of them, and as you have the experience of seeing, note the seeing.